All right, my name is Rich Schmidt, here with Andrew Riechers. We're at Lingua Franca. It's March 10th, 2020. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah.
First question, most important question, why wine?
Yeah. I mean, that is the most important question. Ultimately, I think, and I wouldn't be surprised if this was, sort of a common answer. I sort of reverse engineering that a little bit is more like I knew early on a lot of things that I didn't want to do, and I think that whatever, that was sort of like an idealistic sort of like Lloyd Dobler-esque, like I don't want to package anything processed, I don't want to process anything made, whatever, that whole and what I did know is that I wanted to be sort of involved and I guess in control of a process, or in this case, obviously like an agricultural product that, that's kind of the irony of it, right? That like I wanted to be in control of it, but then you get into it and you realize that, you have like way less control than you'd ever hoped, and any kind of thing that you sort of try to grasp at generally will evade you. But yeah, like it was this feeling that like I wanted, to direct a process, and if that could be meaningful to myself, obviously, and be something that brought something good into the world for people, that was important to me. And so when I grew up in Eugene. And went to U of O afterwards because, I just did, and had no real idea what, I was going to do with my life, but I liked history and literature, and so studied those things, and then eventually, was like, well, I don't want to be a professor, or like, I don't want to teach other people these things, and so I dropped out, and I worked in restaurants for a little bit, and I had grown up sort of outside of Eugene, actually, and so right near King Estate, kind of that little area out there where there are a bunch of vineyards, and drove by those every day, and I think probably in my mind had this, it's like you could grow up somewhere else and it could take a lot longer for you to realize that something like that was possible, right? That there could be a future in that, and I think I was just fortunate enough to like see it and realize that could be a possibility, and I think at the outset was really interested in growing things, and so at that point I knew, I was like, okay, well, I know what I don't want to do, I have some ideas of some things I would like to do, I should probably leave Eugene because I've been here my whole life, and so I just moved to Santa Barbara County, and this little town called Santa Maria for a little bit, and then San Luis Obispo actually for the majority of the time down there. And I, with a plan to go to a junior college, get in-state residency, and transfer to UC Davis was kind of the idea, right? And so there's this woman down there who ran a junior college viticulture and enology program, and I just kind of called her out of the blue one day and said, hey, I'm interested in learning about this. And she was like, okay, well, we'll sign you up for classes, whatever. What do you want to take? And would you be interested in working a harvest? And I said, yeah, sure. Like, I'd heard of that being like a thing. Like, you go and you work super long hours and, probably get paid. I mean, it was definitely minimum wage at the time. So it was like, I don't know. Yeah, it wasn't very much. It was like $8 an hour or something like that. And had no idea. I mean, it's insane to think. I mean, I think about it now. Like, had no idea what I mean. Like, oh wow, that's a lot of grapes in that big stainless steel thing over there. So I worked at this huge winery that made bulk wine, and a lot of it kind of gets like then cleverly branded as Trader Joe's wine. A lot was kind of where that was. And I guess I'm kind of going off on a tangent right now. But yeah, just. Why wine? That was the initial sort of drive in that direction, and I think like what is cool is that it turned out to fulfill those things that I wanted. So, I mean, I think I have a little bit of a different kind of like ending up in wine story. Then it's not like I had some great bottle and was like, I have to pursue this. I just thought a lot about the kind of life that I want and tried this out, and it turned out that I couldn't have loved it. I couldn't love it more, and am good enough at it that now, whatever, 15 years later, I'm still doing it.
So let's talk about you talk about this vague notion of harvest, and that's a big busy time. There's grapes and tanks and stuff. So tell me about that first experience, and were you hooked immediately? Was there a learning curve? What was your kind of initial response to that?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I was hooked in the sense that I was being sort of engaged in the way that I wanted to be engaged, and I was like learning things that I had no concept of, and that you had to be like physically there and capable, and also mentally there and capable, and then the process itself just unfolded. I mean, it was like I just all these questions that lead to more and more. I just had no idea what the world of it could possibly be, and that's what's here we are. Like every step along the way that happens, right? Like, so I did that harvest at this huge facility, and then worked at a much smaller winery kind of within that co-op there. So like one side was this big massive bulk facility, and then on the other side was another building that was this sort of co-op shared equipment space, which then like my second harvest, I'm like in this space with 30 other winemakers who are starting out their brand, and now are kind of like a who's who of Santa Barbara County producers. It's in a really cool way, and you just kind of wander over and say like, why does this smell like this, or why is this that, and people were generous with their knowledge and their time, and it was this community. I mean, that place also the people lived obviously kind of all over the place because it was a little bit remote where this facility was, and for the first couple years down there, everyone just parked an RV out back of the winery and slept there, and like lunch would kind of start, and everybody kind of pitched in and had these ladies just kind of like cook for us, and then kind of lunch would wind down and people would sort of clean up, but be like bringing bottles, and then like dinner would start back up, and so it was just kind of this like constantly rotating table with bottles always being put on it, and then everybody's there working long hours and then crashing there and getting up early and doing the whole thing again, and so like that aspect of it, this community, this kind of like pursuit, and it seemed sort of lawless at the time, like I mean, it's like this was right before this was like right when Sideways came out, and so in between my first and second harvest that happened, and like Hitching Post, that brand was made in this facility, and so they were like made up a small corner the first harvest, and then all of a sudden blew up and took over like a huge, I mean, they were making just the demand for Pinot Noir in general, obviously, and then so like we've ridden that wave up here, and that'd be the other thing, like, was I the most qualified person? No, but I was 21 years old and enthusiastic and curious and had all kinds of energy, and so I just kind of kept moving, from place to place within that. I worked for a winery called Summerland for 2 years as their cellar master, and then that led to a job at a winery called Sanguis, where I was the only employee for 2 years, and then then after 4 or 5 years down there, I was like, I got to come back to Oregon.
I'm curious, you talked earlier about kind of wanting to control you mentioned the kind of the irony of wanting to control this process. So along the way, you obviously had jobs where you control a small part of the process, cellar master. Was there did you have an affinity for anything more than another? Was there a certain part of the year, a certain part of the cycle that appealed to you more than others?
Yeah, I mean, it's always harvest. I don't know if it's, for me, I think I really like to feel useful, and that's the time of year that I feel most useful. Like, that's when my kind of skill sets sort of align. Never was excellent at, never super proficient in Microsoft Excel. And so, like that for me was always the most exciting time. It's like that early build up too, where you're just like, any day now, when you're out in the vineyards and it's summer and it's beautiful, and there's this anticipation of this like frenzy of activity, and then the application of my experience. That I think is that's the most exciting time. It's the most fun time.
As you're in roles like that, and you're seeing different kind of ways to make wine, you talk big and small, co-op, you're in different roles. At what point do you start developing kind of, okay, if I do this for myself, I want to do this, I don't want to do this? Like, what point do you start kind of developing your philosophy or your future style?
Yeah. I mean, pretty early on. I mean, I think that even in the beginning, and knowing how much, or not even really knowing how much I didn't know, making wine on this kind of massive scale, like, you pretty quickly, and especially with the access to these other really small producers, you quickly realize there's like much more lovely and sort of connected work out there to be done. And so whether like specifically I was like, I want to do this technique or what or this or whatever, not necessarily that as much as I would like to be working thoughtfully and connected to these places where the grapes are grown, and like producing something that I hesitate to say that like wine has artistic value necessarily, and it maybe, sure, but like that's not the point I'm trying to make. But something that like that you can like be proud of the craft of, and so like in cellar work, I think working at a big place and then learning from talented people, I learned to be like proud of doing each little activity as thoughtfully as possible, saying like what's the end goal of topping, okay, like how can I do that more thoughtfully, or what's the end goal of the way that I'm moving this wine out of this barrel to this tank, or whatever it is. And just being as like sort of present and looking at what are we trying to achieve here, and doing that in the most beautiful way possible.
So you wanted to come back to Oregon at that point. So tell me what your next step was.
Yeah, I loved California and think California is an amazing place, but I really like the greenness, and I like when it rains, and Santa Barbara's kind of candy land. It's just like, it's going to be sunny and 75, whatever. It's like it's beautiful, but almost didn't feel the like tension of the struggle as much, and I had a friend who was working at J.K. Carrier, family friends with Jim, and he had worked one harvest and then was going to stay on for another harvest, and I was like, I'd love to get back up into Oregon, and so that opportunity presented itself, and I ended up working for Jim for 2 years, not as his assistant winemaker, because it was always referred to as assistant to the winemaker, which was just this is a good joke. I'm sure you've interviewed Jim, and he was probably very entertaining. So was there for 2 years, and that was another, another incredible experience of learning. Certainly like cellar proficiency, and Jim is like wine MacGyver. Like I remember, he used to be in this, 115-year-old barn that was, absolutely not designed to be a winery. And what this, what he did, the work that we did there was, in retrospect, pretty incredible. The maneuvering and the way that the flow of that place worked in such a tiny, ill-equipped place. You learn a lot of like creativity again to like how do we get to our end goals there. But yeah, ultimately like the drive to come back to Oregon was that I knew that I wanted to end up here, and I was excited to sort of start to kind of just be steeped in what Oregon Pinot Noir is about, and like how to be the best producer of Oregon Pinot Noir that I can be.
So what were the biggest differences as you came back to Oregon? What were the biggest industry differences between your work in Santa Barbara County and your work and what was going on in Oregon? What were the biggest, was it cultural differences? Was it production differences? What changed? What was the biggest change for you coming back?
Yeah, certainly there's sort of a different community, and I guess like, I moved in with friends in Portland, and there was like that kind of restaurant world community that was like kind of opened up another world of wine that I hadn't really experienced in kind of isolation down there. I think the biggest difference is just, I think it is just alluded to it a little bit, but like that tension, that like struggle of, in Santa Barbara, like ripeness is kind of a given. Like, it is. It's gonna. The sun is going to shine. It might like mist on your fruit a little bit, and like, but it's not the the sometimes kind of battery that we sometimes it's just like, well, it's not summer anymore, and that is the reality here, and that was really appealing, and something that was all that granted to say, like I came up to Oregon in 2008, and so we've just had like mostly really hot vintages, but even so, there's this feeling of you have to be on top of it, and you have to do the work, otherwise it's going to close out and you might not get there. And that was appealing and new, and I like the resultant wines.
So you were there for a couple of years, and then what?
2 years, and then, it had sort of a different journey, I think, than a lot of whatever cellar hand people have, where I basically just kind of showed up, and there was so much work to be done that they didn't let me leave, and so I never did the like Southern Hemisphere, Northern Hemisphere thing, and that was something that had always really appealed to me. And so through Jim connection there, went to New Zealand and worked in Central Otago at a place called Burn Cottage, which is Ted Lemon of Litterize consulting project. He consults for that project down there, and so it's this. It was unbelievable. First of all, New Zealand is it's an incredible place to be and travel in, and the farm. We lived in this house on the farm, and they probably didn't eat anything that didn't come from that place most of the time that we were there. There's chickens and cows and lamb, and there's this unbelievable garden, and it's this. It is a full biodynamic farm, right? Like all the preps, everything is grown and made there. that was, I mean, an incredible experience. And so I got to go down there, kind of leading up to harvest. So I was probably in the vineyard for 3 weeks, maybe a month, I guess. Learning those things, and and there's sort of this combination of biodynamic, and then also just like the minutia of, I mean, like, I literally sorted cow shit. Like, we went out into the field and we like found only the freshest and put it in wheelbarrows and brought it back to a table where then we like went through it to like pick out, grass or any rocks or anything, or any of the like hardened, like, and moved the sorted cow shit over here. I mean, and this was like one of the first things we did when we got there. I was like, is this, I didn't know if it was a joke. Anyway, it didn't, it didn't take too long where you're just like, oh, this is just whatever. It was grass not that long ago. Yeah, but anyway, beautiful. I mean, an amazing experience. And then that experience led to working in Burgundy later that year. So 2010, I was, split between New Zealand and Burgundy, and that felt like the pilgrimage that I needed to make, and also the opportunity was there. You had to jump on it. So worked in the Haute Côte, so high, kind of like above, for this woman named Claire Nodan, who, I mean, this is also like, I mean, at the time, it's 2010, it's like, I didn't know what natural wine was, but that's what she was doing a lot, sort of slowly transitioning her family estate into that, and was sort of the, like one of the early kind of darlings of that scene in Paris, and still, I mean, now it's like everybody knows her wines, and they're great. So that experience was right. I mean, we were working with these like 80-year-old vines in the Haute Côte, as well as we had, she has a small parcel of Echezeaux, so we're working with some Grand Cru fruit and a few Premier Cru things spread around, and I mean, that was just the experience to see, like, okay, well, like, this is what people are whatever referencing, for better or for worse, right? I mean, it's like, I think the most valuable thing that I took away from that experience was like, we just have to stop saying that our wines are Burgundian. But it's just all a part of building this sort of like lens of experiences that you see things through and can apply to your future work. And so that was a lot of fun and valuable. And I mean, was like exposed to I mean, just wines at a certain level that I had not had access to, and just kind of broadening the horizons of what's possible. And I think an appeal, you see this kind of like legacy type of work play out there, where I mean, this guy, her dad lived, I mean, I lived in like a 250-year-old house that like was on top of the first cellar that had, since her father had then kind of expanded it and built the house that he then lived in. But he's just the most classic old awesome French dude with like a beret, kind of like checking on stuff, and like, he gave me a beret when I left. I still have it. And he had started from his father, passing down a few parcels, and Claire's husband is Jean-Yves Bizot, and now their kids are gonna have the choice to inherit, I mean, like, some legendary things. And you see this, like, it's not so like siloed into the moment. They're not prisoners of like whatever, like fads or like pleasing anyone really. I mean, obviously, like it needs to be sustained, but there's this like long view that's really appealing, and I think that leads to sort of a different kind of, I don't know about a different level, but it's certainly a different kind of respect for place, obviously, the work in a lot of cases, and I think sort of like the kind of like interchange between, I mean, like this guy, the cellar master there had been there for decades, and his father had worked for her father in the vineyards, and it was this like preservation of community, and like it wasn't just like, I mean, he was really good at his job, and you almost like have to be if that's what's, I mean, like you work in a place for like decades, like you have to really be devoted to that place, and it means something to you, but in return, like they're just as devoted to the people who had worked with them for that amount of time, and their families, and like providing a sustenance for a small community.
So I'm curious, you joked earlier about it teaching you that Oregon wine should not claim to be Burgundian. What did you mean by that?
Well, I just mean, I think a lot of times we sort of have to, right? I mean, even now, like the scale, when you really step back from it, like Oregon makes a tiny amount of wine, right? There are like many single wineries in California that make more wine than the entire state of Oregon put together. And so I always feel like, and I just did it there, like we always feel like we sort of have to like juxtapose ourselves against California in some ways. And kind of by doing that is saying like, well, we make more Burgundian wines, right? I mean, so that's sort of this like narrative that, while that might be true in terms of some profiles, right? Like, I think it is more valuable to say like, we make Oregon wine and we should be proud of that, because I think Oregon wines like have something to say in the conversation. I mean, obviously they do. That's ridiculous to even say I think that, but like we should. That for me, that's my focus, right? Like, I think working for Jim and tasting the first of his wines, and recently sort of like seeking out older Oregon Pinot. There's a couple wine shops that I'm not going to say the names of because I don't want anybody else to sort of pillage. But there's like people who bought wines in the 90s on release and kept them. And I don't think a lot of people did that, because I think people's assumption was that, who knows how well these wines are going to age, and there was such a small amount of them. It was a young business, but there's a couple treasure troves, and if you dive in there, like I've been every harvest, I try to buy a 6-pack of older Oregon wines and like share them here with the interns and whatever people, the curious. And generally, we've been like pretty blown away with how well things have held up. We opened a 91 Evesham Wood from Temperance Hill. That was like mind-blowingly beautiful. It was amazing. And these older Christum wines and St. Innocent. I mean, they're just like. I think that my hope is that as we build those libraries and we build those histories, that we start to realize like our sort of singular place, or continue to realize our singular place. I'm not like, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
Without having to compare constantly, or what Oregon is versus what they're not, or what someone else is. Makes sense. I'm curious. The 2 harvests in a single year. You talk about harvest and the amount of effort it takes to do a harvest. Tell me about doing 2 in a single year, multiple sides of the world. Yeah, and what that takes.
I mean, I wish I could have done more. I think the reality is that like, it is a lot of work, physically, but I'm the only employee of our winery, and that means anything that happens, I do, and I would like to keep it that way for as long as possible. And maybe to my detriment, I feel that way anytime I step into a winery. Is like, no, I want to do everything. Obviously, in some places, that's just not realistic at all. But I think you end up feeling or I did, sort of recharged by new experience, and learning and being, and then just being somewhere else, and kind of experiencing a culture. And for me, that, I could have done 4 harvests. If I was smarter, I should have worked in Australia also, or bounced a little bit more. I know people do that, but yeah, because I don't know. I definitely wasn't worn out by it. It brought me a tremendous amount of joy.
So after France, what happened next?
Yeah, came back and was. Yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, I didn't know exactly what the next move was going to be. And I think my first inclination was to go back again to France the next year, and had a couple opportunities to do that. I was going to go work in the Rhone, and was sort of in the process of working that out and getting that sort of lined up and logistics, when kind of out of the blue, I got an email from Antiquitera, and they had, through whatever the guy I worked for at Burn Cottage, Ted's assistant at the time actually, had said nice things about me, and they were looking for somebody. And at that time, I was familiar with Antiquitera, and was, it was high on the list of places that I would want to work, obviously. So I kind of weighed those opportunities, and thought well, that's kind of a once, who knows when that opportunity will come up again. And so jumped on it. And so whatever, I think I worked in a restaurant for a couple months before that started. And it was ostensibly just a harvest job, but I knew they didn't have an assistant winemaker at the time, and so I worked my ass off, and they liked me, and so kept me around for 5 years. And that, talk about kind of a sort of world, or a horizon broadening experience. Not just thought process, right? It's it's intense and wonderful, but really Nate Reddy, who was the GM at the time and is a MS and now has his own project out in the Gorge, would put together these unbelievably thoughtful tastings, right? And we drank, just wines I'd never heard of that now I take as given and for granted, and that now there are everywhere. He's kind of a savant, and so again, it was this sort of broadening of what is possible in the world of wine and possible here in Oregon, and really I definitely always knew that I wanted, deep in the recesses, I was I have to do this just me. I have to, be on my own at some point. But that was a really that cemented it. It's this desire to be a part of that conversation about the future, and to someday be a reference point for something beautiful and interesting that happens in the world of wine in Oregon. Mm-hmm. And I think that beyond, right, first of all, at Antiquitera, right, the attention to detail and the sort of drive, the sort of dogged pursuit of beauty was inspiring, and the risks that we were willing to take were things that were ways that I already felt like I wanted things that I wanted to include in my whatever winemaking repertoire, or the lens that I see things through. And yeah, we did that, and they do that still. And I was fortunate to be a part of that.
Give me an example of something that was challenging to you, or sort of challenging the norms from your work there.
Let's see. I mean, I don't think that I definitely did sign an NDA, but I think Maggie would be fine to.
It can be non-trade secret is fine.
No. We did a lot of interesting things. Like, I'll tell this one. So we experimented with not quite drying fruit, I would say, but taking, harvesting the grapes and then laying them out in baskets and sort of concentrating them for a period of time. Right now, I think they've built this thing where they actually like hang the fruit. And I remember I think in 2012, it was like towards the end of harvest, and I was kind of cleaning out my car, and I found underneath the driver's seat one perfect cluster of Chardonnay. Like, beautiful. And I was like, how did, it's in the bottom of my, like, whatever old crusty Volvo. First of all, okay, we picked that 3 weeks ago. So, like, this is probably a sample that I took even before that to see when we should pick. And so I brought it in. It was, like, perfectly intact. And so I brought it in to Nate and Maggie, and we, like, tasted it. And it was the best grape I've ever eaten in my life. Like, it was unbelievable. And obviously, it's not like that was, like, we had never heard of drying fruit before. But we definitely were like, we should think about that next year, as kind of an experiment. And so the challenge there is that is a huge fucking pain in the ass. And you've got these like wobbly stacked up basket things with like, it takes up so much space, which was not a luxury at Antiqua Terra in a lot of ways, with like fans blowing on them. So extension cords going all over it, like puddles, and it's like, logistics, that was fun, is working out the logistics of how to do all of these kind of crazy things. I mean, we topped with rocks a few, like every year. I think they still do it. We would take like one lot from the estate, and rather than kind of topping it with other things that got broken down to keep it just from the estate, we had rocks that we went and got from a river and boiled and rinsed, and then would like count and put rocks in there. And then so getting the rocks out of a barrel, I'll tell you, is not fun. But we did it. I think ultimately it just boils down to just being willing to, that's kind of crazy. Like, the estate was our best fruit, and yeah, let's put a few hundred rocks in it. Like, that seems like a risk, but and it was, but it's one that we were proud. I'm proud that we like took those risks and tried to learn.
Tell me about you've been an assistant winemaker a lot of different places, a lot of different people. Tell me what the role of an assistant winemaker is. What is your day-to-day? What do you do day-to-day as an assistant winemaker? Obviously, you've had different kinds of winemakers. You've had different winemakers you've worked for in different parts of the world. What was your role? What did you see your part of the scheme as?
Yeah, I think it definitely depends a lot on the person that you're working for, right? Like, I think primarily you're trying to like be, in a lot of ways, you're just trying to be another version of the winemaker, right? Like, you want your first instinct in a moment of decision to be their first instinct, or at least like to know what they would do or what they want or what the end, like to know intimately what the end goal is, and then be the kind of like hands that fill in the work up until that point. I think like I know that you know, like anybody who's working and like hands-on involved in the wine is going to have an imprint, right? A human terroir, and I think that's awesome. Like that was one of the most fun parts of my job, is like hiring interns and like choosing like who do we want, like who's going to be on the team to sort of like as thoughtfully and carefully and attentively act out the physical actions that we're doing on a day-to-day basis, because you know those things are, I believe those things are cumulative, and yeah, like right now I get to do all of those things, but at a certain point we'll be bigger and I just only, you know, I'm you know getting slower and older and dumber, and so yeah, we'll definitely need to hire somebody. And yeah, like my hope would be that I was to those people carrying out the work that they wanted, rather than putting my own imprint on it, aside from the ways in which that is just kind of happen inevitably. I think also you sort of you kind of get to be, especially, you know, I mean, I keep bringing up Antiquitera, but you know, it was 5 years when we did things as kind of challengingly as possible in a lot of ways. You can sort of innovate and think like, all right, this is part of the process, and that is important to the end result in the wine. How can we do this, how can we do any of this more beautifully and more thoughtfully? I think that is definitely, that's a huge part of the assistant winemaker's role. But again, ultimately I think it just boils down to being the person who kind of like enacts the policies at a certain size. I mean, I've never, like, you know, there are, you know, huge wineries that have like 4 assistant winemakers, and I think a lot of them, you know, I feel bad for them, because I think that sometimes you're like an assistant winemaker, but that means that you're like in front of a computer all day, which is, like I said, not my forte.
So you've talked throughout this about this eventual, I need my own thing, I want to have control of a project that's entirely my own. So tell me about how that came into being.
This Audeant at Antiquitera, you know, we were a small team, and so we all wore a lot of hats and would share like tastings, right, responsibilities. And so one day I was doing a tasting, and only 2 people came, and it ended up being like, instead of an hour and a half, it ended up being like 4 hours, and just kind of like grabbing this bottle and opening that, and oh, you like this, and let's check this out. And this couple was in town from Chicago, and kind of randomly they had intended on going to Europe, I think, but something fell through, and so they're like, oh, we'll hop out to Oregon. They've been passionate, you know, wine collectors and diners, and we just had a really long, cool conversation about the things that we loved about, you know, wine. And they had never been to Oregon, like I said, and were just kind of in awe of it, right? They had spent a lot of time going to Napa, and I think there was a special appeal here, and they certainly were struck by the community, obviously, just like the natural beauty and the wines. Anyway, and so, you know, sort of joking around, one of them had just left their job, and I said, you know, what do you now, you know, like, what do you want to do when you grow up? And he was like, you know, I can see can see kind of investing in wine and in particularly in Oregon. And I think like their initial conversations were talking about property and just kind of like developing a small vineyard property and so whatever. I said, look, if you're interested and you need help or you want to talk about it, like I'm happy to. And 6 months later, I got an email, and that conversation led to another conversation, which led to whatever, like a dozen property visits and some bare land and some existing vineyards and they always, I said, look, I'm going to be honest and say like, this is not really that special, or this could be really special, and this is going to be challenging these ways, and but if you want to do this, and like if you eventually we got to the point where it was like if I wanted to be involved, it's like it's got to be meaningful, and it's got to be special, something like that can be like really compelling, and so in that process we sort of like rather than buying a site, developing the land, and all of the time that goes into that, purchasing small amounts of fruit and sort of starting a brand, and then kind of bringing in the estate to sort of supplement that and have some flexibility to like let the vines develop roots and not try to just like get fruit out of them as soon as possible. So conversations with a couple of the people that we've worked with at Antiquitera, some fruit was available, and Thomas was building Lingua Franca here, and it wasn't done when we started making wine in here. There were no doors, and there would be like 20 construction dudes with like compressed air and nail gun, like scissor lifts going all. It's a miracle that nobody was seriously injured that harvest. No doors, no sinks, no bathroom. We shared porta potties with 20 construction dudes, so this was happening, and has been a really neat part of our journey, in terms of the community that's here, and sort of a place to kind of like foster our slow and steady growth as a brand. And so we've got 12 acres up on Parrot Mountain, that we planted in between, we planted in 17 and 18. Mostly Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, bunch of different clones, some Gamay right now. And I think really excitingly about that place is like we go from 700 and change feet up to 1,100 feet elevation. So we haven't planted all the way up to 1,100 feet, but we do have a fair bit that's at and above 1,000 feet elevation up there, which I think is going to be exciting. And 19 maybe would have been challenging, but we'll see. It keeps getting warmer, unfortunately, and so I think that might prove to be an interesting place to grow grapes and make wine. It's certainly beautiful up there.
Back where you started, back on Parrot Mountain.
Well, yeah. So that was, I think I had Parrot Mountain kind of rattling around in there always, and when a property up there came for sale, I jumped at the opportunity to look at it, and had always I think in that process was looking at elevation, and I buy fruit from Nisa, which is relatively high elevation for the Dundee Hills. Luminous Hills, which is out due west of Carleton, goes up past 900 feet elevation, I think. It's right around there. We bought fruit from Jessica Cortell's home vineyard, Carlisle's Crest, which is at and above 900 feet elevation. I kind of going back to talking about that sort of pursuit of tension, and like needing to like do the work to make sure that you get there. I was just have been drawn to those places, and I think we'll see if I'm right. Definitely got, had a bunch of soil pits dug, and when we got the report back, it said all, it's great. It's like all these beautiful volcanic soils, etc. And then at the very end, it was like this note from the soil report guy who said, like, this elevation exceeds the limits of where Pinot Noir will ripen consistently, or something like that. And so like that got emailed to me and my bosses, and like I was like, immediately it was like, guys, it's like, it's okay, deep breaths. It's definitely a risk, but it like is one I think is going to play out in a compelling way.
Tell me about the working with you have the hands-on, you have the full run of the hands-on part of it, but you do have bosses. So tell me about that kind of relationship, and how did you make sure you'd have the sort of the freedom to do what you kind of had in your head to do?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, that was part of our conversations. I'm sure that the conversations that we had, the wines that we drank together, the winemaking philosophy, it's like that's amazing, right? It's a really cool experience. They trust me with that stuff. We made some Chardonnay in 2017, and it wasn't good enough to be bottled under our label, and I was like, guys, we have to declassify this, and they're like, great, okay, do it, right? Like that's a big deal, and that's a commendable approach when you're spending a lot of money to do this. So in that aspect, it's great. Like they are excited about the work that we're doing, and it's fun to like include them. And I mean, they're out here every harvest and every bottling, and they're people with business background, and so there's a lot of areas that I have potential to grow, and they're very smart, and they help me with that. So I think like in terms of the wines, that's me, and they trust me, and that's exciting, and again, commendable. The sort of like aesthetic and artistic direction, like we wanted to all feel a part of that, and that was, I mean, that was a process. Like we bottled our first vintage without labels because we took a very long time to like find something that we all loved, but we got there, and that's fun too, right? I mean, like the naming of a thing is a beautiful experience, and doing that collaboratively was challenging but good. Audeant means they venture, they dare, and I certainly think for them that is representative of this experience, and even and for me, right, like working as the assistant winemaker at Antiquitera was an awesome job, and so like I wasn't going to leave that for just anything. Mm-hmm. And it's so far proven to be a rewarding experience, certainly.
Tell me about the experience of having bottles of wine now that are entirely yours, that are entirely, you have made all of the decisions on, and now you have to sell, or tell me about that experience now, taking those to market and dealing with the good and the bad from that. You certainly, you are responsible for anyone's enjoyment or lack thereof of what's in those bottles. I mean, I'm not a great salesperson, I would say. I'm good at talking about the wines, but I'm not like pushy at all, really. So if people are like, we don't really, I'm like, okay, well, cool, all right, well, I'll see you next time. But fortunately, the response has been good, and people like the wines, and I mean, that I would like. There's obviously a certain amount of ego that gets, like, it feels good when people say nice things about this work that you've done, especially like that there is nothing about those wines that I didn't have a part in, or mostly do, and so
it's a lot of work, and it is representative of the 15 years and every experience and all the things that I believe. And so, yeah, it's a little bit nerve-wracking to put that then out into the world and say, like, well, if people don't like it, then what was that 15 years, right? Like, but fortunately, that's not been the case. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it is a cool experience and a little bit of a nerve-wracking one at the same time. But I guess that you just get to the point where you're like, I believe in the work that I'm doing, and you know, certainly like my philosophical imprint is on those wines, and I think you can see the places that I've worked in those wines. And that's really cool, because it's not like I'm like, you know, I want to incorporate this and this. It's not intentional. It just is, you know, I walk in a vineyard and eat some grapes and it's time to pick, you know, and then it shows up here, and, you know, I sense it, I taste it and touch it, and then go from there. And so, yeah, it just is this sort of accumulated perception that is all in there and slowly eroding, but I build new perceptions, and there we go.
I think accumulated perception actually would have been a pretty good name for the label.
Actually. Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
it's hard to say. It's a lot of
words
there.
Out there. Yeah.
Tell me about you've touched a couple times on your winemaking philosophy, and obviously you've had a lot of interesting teachers over the years. So
yeah.
If you had to sum up your winemaking philosophy, how would you sum it up, and what would be the ultimate takeaway someone could have from a bottle of your wine?
Yeah. I think primarily at the outset, like, the goal is for there to be pleasure there. I also believe that, like, and this goes back to, you know, drinking these older Oregon wines, that, like, sometimes, and personally, like, this has become true, like, that peak opportunity for pleasure happens down the road a little bit. And so there's this balance of, I want the wines to bring delight and joy in their youth, but I can see and hope to craft the potential that greater joy with patience occurs. So, you know, I think a lot of conversation around winemaking philosophy ends up being this kind of, well, like, do you pick early or do you pick late, or, you know, crop levels, or oak, or natural, you know, sulfur or no sulfur, or whatever it ends up being. Like, I guess like, a declarative of those things is less interesting for me than the living in kind of the tension between the extremes, I guess, or sort of like living in the conversation. So I think, like, we live in, like, an increasingly polarized society in many ways, and you know, I guess I won't probably do any of my, like, philosophy friends proud by trying to describe what I'm about to describe, but like, yeah, the concept of, like, the dialectic, like Hegel's dialectic, like, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I think I think in a lot of ways, emotionally, that feels right in how to think about the actions that we're taking, or the decisions that we're making as it pertains to the wines. So if it's like that's boring because I'm in the middle, then I hope that's not the case. But that's what resonates with me, is the conversation, I guess.
Do you feel pressure to? Have you felt pressure to like label yourself? You talk about natural wine, you talk about biodynamic, all the kind of hot topics in wine. Have you felt pressure to align yourself with something like that?
I mean, I would say certainly there's pressure in terms of like, you know, what the market is doing, and you know, certainly like being a person, you know, like living in Portland and being a part of the kind of wine community there and consuming a lot of wine. There's this like, yeah, like, well, I want to be a cool kid. But you know, I'm probably, you know, I'm like 37, so I guess I don't get to be a cool kid anymore, and so that's fine. Like I'm gonna do what I believe, and like, yeah, do I believe that I want to do, like, that I want to input as little as possible into the vineyard? Yeah, and do I want to believe that do I believe that I want to input as little as possible into the wines? Yeah. All that really boils down to is like, how willing are you to do a lot of work? And like, I'm willing, and so yeah, I do get to. I mean, I use sulfur. I get to use less than a lot of people because of the way that the work is done. You know, as we think about farming our own site, you know, that's always the place where more thoughtful work can be done, because I mean, the work is never ending. So would I love for that place to be biodynamically farmed someday? Yeah, maybe not like certified or you know, like, but what I don't want to do is buy a bunch of preps that were made someplace else. Like, I think that place just kind of being its own cycle is the most compelling thing when I think about it that way. And so like, a lot of doing work in that way aligns with, yeah, a biodynamic farming way of thinking, but it aligns with some other things that work as well. And so whatever, there's pressure, but ideally I can kind of like maintain, you know, my beliefs and feel whole and proud of the work that I do without trying to kind of align in this camp or that camp. And hopefully the wines find an audience that resonates with.
So tell me about Audeant's journey so far. Obviously still brand new.
Yeah.
Where are you at right now, and where are you going? Where do you want to be in 10 years?
Yeah. Let's see, 10 years. Well, I mean, in terms of like, you know, right now where we're at is we make like about 1,000 cases of wine every year. You know, so whatever, that's been not very many years. But I think we're like comfortable with that. And as our estate starts to produce fruit, which won't happen this year, but will happen next year, we'll start to kind of grow that and see what that place means and what those wines have to say. And we always want to buy fruit. Like I like absolutely love the people that we work with, and they're like, you know, now at this point, you know, some of these people I've worked with for 9 years now, and we get along, we're friends. It's like that the growing that fruit is collaborative, and so that will always, I think, be a part of what we do. And then, right, so 2 years from now, we'll have our own kind of voice. And so, yeah, in 10 years, where we'd like to be is I'd like to know a lot of what that place has to say, and start to be kind of a voice for, I think, it's not like I want to be like, hey, like, look at us, we're planted really high at really high elevations, but like, I think that is an interesting that's an interesting place to be physically, and where what the wines will be, and I think like the goal would be to be like a reference, like when people think about Oregon Pinot Noir, to be one of the things that people think about when they think about their favorite producers, or when they think about like producers that make wines that aren't just sort of like gesturally Oregon, but are like passionately Oregon wines. Like that's really exciting to me. Yeah, so where do we want to be? Kind of in a nebulous place that we'll see, but still here, and producing wines that I think that compel people and bring people joy, and then whatever, like sustaining a life, being with people that I like, and working with people that I like, and eating and drinking things that I like, and then traveling around the country and doing those with other people, and sharing the good news of Parrot Mountain Pinot Noir.
Do you have a size in mind? Do you have plans for a space of your own in mind?
In mind, in the sense that someday, but I think the plan is a slow build towards that. The potential planted acreage is like 35 acres. And it's not like we're just gonna wall to wall cram vines in there. It's a big property. It's 80 acres. A lot of it is wooded and will just remain that way. There's this cool little fork of Corral Creek that flows through it, and someday building a winery up there. But like we've got a lot of work to do to get to that point, right? For me, you kind of have to earn that, and that takes time and a lot of hard work, and as long as Lingua Franca wants to keep us around, I'm happy to be here. Not that it's like helpful for my commute or anything like that, because that totally sucks, but that's why I sleep in this tent sometimes during harvest.
It is very cozy. I can see it being all right.
It's less cozy during harvest when there's like coyotes running around out here and like making kind of creepy noises, but it's fine.
It's good to know the dogs have shown that they can just come right in.
Exactly. Exactly. Very safe feeling.
Tell me about Oregon wine more in general, and what you've seen since you've become part of the industry. You've been here for a little while now. What's changed in Oregon wine? What does it look like now in 2020?
Certainly like there are like more well-worn paths, literally and figuratively, I guess you'd say. Like a lot of people and like much respect have like worked really hard to make channels to where like Oregon can be on wine lists and be on shelves, and then there's the infrastructure of the industry from like a hospitality standpoint, or like it being like a compelling destination. That certainly has grown. I mean, like I remember, and it's like not something like I'm some old timer, right? There's plenty of people that but like when I first worked with Jim, I remember driving through Dundee, and where the fire station is now was this like giant kind of like dilapidated purple house with like cars up on cinder blocks and like a massive Confederate flag flying like right on Highway 99. And so there's like a real juxtaposition between, it's like, the urban and rural kind of culture, and wine kind of being this like weird bridge in an interesting way. And the Confederate flag is down now. That's a good thing, certainly.
Progress.
And, it like the Allison was just opening, when around that time, and there are restaurants now that are, like slowly kind of developing into sort of like a more sort of like, hopefully not a Napa-esque kind of a place, but yeah, it's important to have, places to experience this beauty. Obviously there's just like way more. I mean, like, I just started a brand. There's a lot more wineries, and I think there's room for that. And I think what's really neat, and I'm sure it's been said over and over again in these interviews, but I think it's important, is that there's like a collaborative spirit, and people want to lift each other up, and this place is like a new but perfect example of that, where there's a bunch of young winemakers, all kind of working together and helping each other out. And I remember in like 2017, I was like talking with, I think it was like Taman, Seth maybe was there too, and we were just kind of like looking around, we were like, where are the adults? And it was like, oh, I guess we're the adults. That's kind of scary. But yeah, it like that spirit of this place, I think, is generally Oregonian. I think we're a kind people, and a progressive and thoughtful people, and I like to think, and I like to believe, and I plan on working towards, regardless of any outside investment or whatever, keeping that culture and that spirit alive, and being proud of it, and being inclusive, and being joyful.
What else do you see as you look ahead for the Oregon wine industry? What's going to happen in the next decade?
I mean, I think people are going to talk about the gorge a lot more, and probably Southern Oregon to some extent a lot more. I think already you see that the conversation doesn't just have to be about Pinot Noir. Like, already, obviously, we're in this like Chardonnay Renaissance, or whatever people want to call it. But it doesn't just have to be about Burgundian varietals as well. I think that still it's tiny, but you start to see a lot of interesting things happening, and maybe. I don't want to commit sacrilege here, but maybe the most beautiful thing to be grown here, we don't know yet, or it's changing constantly, and maybe we should be planting a bunch of Spanish varietals, like Galician varietals, or and people are doing that, and that's awesome and really exciting, and something that I want to be a part of, and something that again is very New World, and then also very Oregonian. It's we can do what we want, that's awesome. We don't have hyper restrictive laws surrounding those things, so why box ourselves in? And I think that's, for me, that's the most, those kind of margins are the most exciting things, I would say, for me.
Someone were to come up to you and say they wanted to get started in the Oregon wine industry, what would your words of wisdom to them be?
I'd go for it. It's brought me such an incredible amount of joy, an incredible, group of friends and mentors, and there's a lot, there's a bounty, there's like a place for you. That's what I would say. Whether it's on any side of production or sales or whatever, like there are good, smart, kind people doing thoughtful work, and you should find those people and see if they'll let you work for them.
All right, last question, because it seems like one that you would enjoy answering. What's the role of wine in society?
I think that through... Yeah, I mean, like, I think generally it's like shared experience. And wine being this singular experience, because it is ever changing, opportunity to sort of imprint it on a memory, whether just the memory of the meal or the memory of the conversation or the memory of the wine and its characteristics, right? Like, and most likely kind of all of those things kind of in concert. And the way that we remember things, wine happens to coincide with, like, smell, taste, and like that it is, like, at its best so beautiful. Like, it really is amazing. And so, like, yeah, I think what you find is that, like, wine is present at a lot of peak experiences, like obviously celebrations and great meals and gatherings of friends who maybe aren't always together, or maybe who are always together, and that's what they do. And ultimately that's it. Like, it just is there. It's there to bring joy. And it's like really, yeah, an honor to get to be a part of that for people's lives, and certainly for my own.
All right. That's all the questions that I have for you.
Great.
Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Anything we didn't cover that we should have covered?
I don't think so. I think that was extensive. I don't have any idea for how long I talked, but hopefully it wasn't
long enough, long enough, but not too long.
All right, good. Yeah,
all good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us today,
my pleasure.
for sharing your story, sharing your thoughts, and we will go ahead and let you off the hook.
Thank you.